finally we come to Herbert Marcuse, the supreme cultural Marxist, the big one. He was very popular among the New Left in the 60s, who chanted about Marx, Mao, and Marcuse. He was a young man at the beginning of the Frankfurt School when it moved from Germany, but stayed in America for a long time and was very influential, spreading cultural Marxism. He helped the OSS, the precursor of the CIA, to denazify Germany after World War II, but he was not pro-Western. If you wanted to really capture the essence of cultural Marxism, just remember this quote from Herbert Marcuse. The West is guilty of genocidal crimes against every civilization and culture it has encountered. America and Western civilization are the world's greatest repositories of racism, sexism, nativism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, fascism, and Nazism. American society is oppressive, evil, and undeserving of loyalty. Wow. Sounds sort of like the resident of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, doesn't it? Marcuse came up with so-called critical theory, destructive criticism of literally every aspect of Western civilization. The idea was not to say what you're for, but only what you're against, and induce pessimism and despair. He also used the technique of labeling opponents as mentally ill or phobic, such as homophobe or xenophobe or a hater, a sick person, sort of reminiscent of the old Soviet Union, who used to put dissidents in mental institutions. If you disagree with the New Left, you're mentally ill. He also pioneered so-called oppression studies, departments in every college, such as women's studies, black studies, Chicano studies, etc., all aiming incessant criticism at Western civilization. So the new proletariat in this cultural Marxist scheme was not the old proletariat of Marx, but rather this collection of supposedly oppressed groups. And of course, white Christian male capitalists are always guilty as the oppressors. So much for our American founders. Marcuse wrote Eros and Civilization in 1955, another synthesis of Marx and Freud, advocating quote-unquote liberation through polymorphous perversity. This idea was taken up by the 60s radicals. If it feels good, do it. These 60s radicals advocated sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the pleasure principle, make love, not war. Angela Davis was a student of Herbert Marcuse, considered his best student. The politically correct witch hunts on today's campuses are merely the implementation of Marcuse's concept of liberating toleration, tolerance for movements from the left, but no tolerance for movements from the right, enforced by students of the Frankfurt School who have become professors of women's studies and other oppression studies on modern campuses. Continuing in this tradition, there was Saul Alinsky, writer of Rules for Radicals. His idea was similar: destroy the American middle class while pretending to sympathize with it. A stealth attack was part of his idea. A Trojan horse attack, pretend to be for the middle class while destroying it. Isolate and demonize opponents and use ridicule and destructive criticism. Rules for Radicals, incidentally, is dedicated to Lucifer, and, interestingly enough, Alinsky was the subject of Hillary Clinton's college thesis. Well, our founders warned us about the cultural Marxists and the attack on our culture. Benjamin Franklin said, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become more corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. And John Adams, our second president, said our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Here's George Washington in his farewell address. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? In other words, how could you trust somebody's oath in a court of law if they don't believe in God? Continuing, Washington said, and let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. It is substantially true that virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. Who that is a sincere friend to it can look with indifference upon attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric? Moving forward to Alexis de Tocqueville in the 1830s, writing about America, he said, I sought for the key to the greatness and genius of America in her harbors, her fields, her forests, her mines, her vast world commerce, in her public schools and institutions of learning. I sought for it in her democratic Congress and her matchless Constitution. Not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits flame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because America is good, and if America ever ceases to be a good, America will cease to be great. Well, here are 7 thou shalt nots for combating cultural Marxism. Let's look at them one by one. Don't abandon God. Don't be intimidated. Don't compromise. Do your homework. Don't give up. Don't surrender posterity. And don't believe the opposition. Number 1, don't abandon God. Here's somebody who was born in 1876. I knew this person. This was my grandmother. She was not born at the bicentennial, but born on the centennial of American independence. And here I am, born in 1958. I had the privilege of getting to know her, and to say that she was different than most people you'll meet nowadays is an understatement. This woman was saturated with Christianity. Christianity to her was not a crutch, but it was an iron lung. She could not live without it. This was what Americans were like back 100+ years ago. I remember as a child looking at her Bible and seeing virtually every word underlined throughout the entire book. The Judeo-Christian worldview permeated the thinking of these people and the American founders. By today's elites, they would be ridiculed as religious fanatics. The American founders designed a constitution which protects God-given inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, by limiting the ability of politicians and protectors who are imperfect or fallen to remove from them the temptation to centralize and amass tyrannical power. The Constitution is fundamentally incompatible with an atheist, humanist, secular, or pagan worldview which rejects the Judeo-Christian belief system or asserts progress toward human perfectibility by human means. If we neglect God, our Constitution is powerless and doomed, like Samson minus his hair. Our Constitution depends on a self-governing and self-policing people by and large because of the vast amount of liberty that it grants us. But without that internal government in each individual provided by God, liberty turns into license and chaos.